In this video, we're talking with Dr. Jamie Marich, author of Dissociation Made Simple. Jamie's one of my favorite people in the EMDR world because she's so candid, she's so open, she's so authentic, and she talks about her own dissociative experience, about her own system of parts. She is talking about how to demystify and to destigmatize dissociation and what we can do as EMDR therapists, what we can do better to work with dissociative clients. Here is the interview with Dr. Jamie Marich. Dr. Jamie Marich, welcome back to the Art and Science of EMDR, and thank you for joining us on a Friday afternoon.
Welcome. Oh, wow. Yeah. Art and Science. Last time you were more in a traditional podcast form. So this is nice to be doing this chat with other friends with us. I love it.
Yeah. We have a growing community. We just yesterday or this morning passed 2,500 members. We have members from all over the world, and it's really exciting to see this community growing.
Yes.
And Jamie, I want to say a special thank you for just being authentic and being you. And I talked with one of my consultees yesterday, someone I really care about, who feels concerned about being authentic and feels like she needs to cite all the research and just know everything. And your name came up, and I think you've been an inspiration for many of us in the field, that you can bring your authentic self and there's nothing wrong with that. It's actually, we are drawn to that.
I relate to what your consultee experienced. I was there at a certain point in my career, a story I've told now several times. I tell it to an extent in the book, but as we know, processing can continue after a session ends. So a lot of the stories I tell in the book, I've had a chance to process with a little bit more. And the story I share is, so I was diagnosed with my dissociative condition in 2004. And when I was diagnosed, my whole life suddenly made sense, is how I like to describe it. And that's an experience a lot of people with dissociative identities have. And so I was diagnosed in 2004. I took my EMDR basic training between 2005 and 2006. And I remember at the part 2 in 2006, I went to kind of a special breakout they had. That's how the EMDR Institute did it at the time, on dissociation. And I was sitting there listening to the trainer, thinking, she's making this a lot more complicated than it needs to be. Yet, kind of in this fawn response, I had this, but what do I know? I'm just somebody who has this condition. She's the expert. She's the one who's really studied it. And I better sit back and listen to her. And I think even after the talk, I went up to her and said, like, what a great job. What a great job. But inside, the sense of like, you're making this way too hard. And yeah, I've learned a lot since 2006. And one of the things I've learned is that I know more than I think I did, based on my lived experience, my emotional connection to the content. And I just see so many people in the field, particularly people who are drawn to communities like yours and communities like mine, who have this toxic self-doubt. I need to do one more training. I need to do one more this, one more that, because I don't know enough. And I love that pursuit of knowledge. I don't want to knock down seeking consultation, seeking training. Yet, are you doing it from this place of, I want to enrich my own understanding and my own personal connection? Or am I doing it because, I don't think I'm enough? And what you can bring authentically has so much more value than any traditional teacher has likely told you.
Right.
So that's a message I have.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I want to ask you about just being open about being a person with a dissociative system, talking about your parts openly. This book is more authentic than even any other book that you've written before. Was that hard to be so vulnerable and just let the world know about your parts?
Yes, is the short answer. It was hard, yet I knew I couldn't hold it back anymore. So even though I embraced the uncertainty of it, embraced the fear of it, I couldn't go on any other way. And another story that I tell in the book is coming out for me was a progressive experience, because I would say I first dipped my toe out in 2011 in EMDR Made Simple, which is my book that you read all the way back in the day. And in that book, I believe I use language like, I've struggled with a lot of dissociative symptoms connected to complex trauma. And then over the years at various workshops that I gave or trainings that I gave, I kind of read the room to see if I felt safe enough to talk about having a dissociative disorder. And in certain spaces, yes. In certain spaces, it was definitely a hell no. And one time after such a talk, a woman came up to me and said, I cannot believe a presenter at the front of the room was that open about having a dissociative system and dissociative disorders. And I couldn't tell if she was horrified or impressed. And it turned out she was impressed. And at that point, more people would come up to me after talks saying like, I can't believe you said it, but I'm glad you did, because me too.
Yeah.
And that is a lot of what fueled me on to keep going for it. And a couple things. So part of the progressions, that was like 2011 to 2014. And then in 2016, you may recall there was a presidential election here in the United States that
I recall. Yeah.
Yes, that let's just say whatever your politics are, I was left with a surprisingly walking reminder of my father, who was my primary tormentor, as president of this country. And that, coupled with a marriage that was ending, it just took me into a really deep nosedive. It was probably the first time I actually took a leave off of work from training and teaching and therapy, because I had to re-engage with EMDR and really take care of myself. And getting involved with Elizabeth Davis, who's my EMDR therapist, who I know you have had on, it was just life-changing for me. It really showed me what the fusion of EMDR and expressive arts together with a therapist who was really dissociation competent. And my first EMDR therapist who diagnosed me was dissociation competent. And so the work I did with Elizabeth, again, emboldened me a little bit more to come out like this. And the story that I tell in the book was the real turning point moment was in 2017, when the marriage did end and ended very dramatically. My ex-husband did what was perhaps my greatest fear, which was try to use my dissociative disorder against me publicly. And the whole story's in the book. And he did, and it didn't work. And I was filled with the sense of my greatest fear came true.
Yeah.
And nothing happened. And even Elizabeth and another therapist I was still working with, they kind of reviewed what he tried to post online. And they said, he looks like the ass here, coming after somebody who's vulnerable about her dissociative experience. And there it was like, shit, if other professionals come after me, they may look like the ass.
Yeah.
Because we talk about, we ask these things of our clients to be vulnerable, to trust their emotions, to trust their experiences. And so after that, it's like, screw it. I'm doing this. I'm here. And then in 2018 is when I wrote the article about dissociation phobia. And that's when I really outed myself as being a system. Later in 2018, I spoke at the Know It, the Network of EMDR Trainers meeting at the EMDR conference. And here I was sitting in a circle with all these people I had come to both admire and fear over the years. And I told them very candidly, I've sat at your meetings and your conferences for going on 14 years now, listening to the way dissociation is talked about. And I'm here to tell you that we are Jamie. and we're a 5-part system, and this is what we think about the things you have to say about us.
Yeah.
And it was just, again, it was terrifying. And because I know the way a lot of professionals, even EMDR professionals, talk about dissociation, yet I knew I had to do it. And ever since then, it's just been every year I've been able to step into more authenticity.
Yeah. And in the book, you've been open about being bisexual, and you've been open about coming out as a person in recovery. But still, you're saying that in the book, coming out as a person with a dissociative system has been the hardest.
Without question, the hardest. And bear in mind, that includes coming out as bisexual to my very religious family.
Yeah.
I was condemned to hell once more for that. It's part of my trauma experience. Yet this was terrifying, because I know, as I mentioned, how a lot of professionals even regard dissociation. I know that a couple times, like in the 2016, 2017 era, I had tried to have real candid personal conversations about dissociation, even with some of the big thought leaders in dissociation. There was just this immediate discomfort that came on over them.
Why?
About
Jamie, why are we so afraid of dissociation? When I say we, I mean EMDR therapists. Why are we so afraid of dissociation, working with dissociation, screening for dissociation?
There's a lot of reasons. And I do think it fundamentally comes down to fears we have about trauma and not having done our own work with it, not having looked at our own relationship with dissociation. Because I think when we do that, even if you don't have a dissociative disorder or you're not a dissociative system, dissociation becomes a lot more normal and a lot less terrifying. I mean, I do think some of this fear does come from a legitimate place that I want to honor, in that I don't want to do more harm to people. Because I love that mug so much. Because of course, there have been horror stories about clients who have dissociative identities being overly flooded by therapy. And so, but I don't like some of the reaction that has happened to that, even in the dissociation specialists, which is, well, stick with safety, containing, grounding, safety, containing, grounding. And yes, all of those are very good things. But I think I knew this already, Rotem, but this other explanation has become really highlighted to me in recent weeks as I've been doing this virtual book tour and speaking with you and others, and you were at my training last week. And I am very open in talking about the fact that we are a 5-part system. And I consider the number 5 because the driver, the lead, the person who's fronting is Jamie. Yet even the adult Jamie has like the Dr. Jamie and the Jamie side, the get shit done part of Dr. Jamie, and the very like vulnerable human part that is Jamie. And then Jamie has 4 ego states that are connected to younger ages on board with her. And we call them 4, 9, and 19. And honestly, and I really hope I could communicate this with the depths of my heart. For a lot of years, I tried pressing that down. People are going to think I'm crazy. It has always been very natural to me from when I was a child to talk with singular we pronouns. We instead of I. And
you didn't know why. I
didn't know why, and I fluctuate now between I and we. But I remember even when I got back into treatment here 6-7 years ago, I had the sense of, you better keep that we in check because you've been saying we a lot. And that's a sign that, something's really broken, and screw it. Like it's a sign that I'm actually validating the wholeness of me. And this makes a lot of dissociation specialists even scared that I'm this honoring of the fact that we're a system, and I'm not the only one doing this. I come to the Healing Together conference any year, which is the conference I really feel at home at in the dissociative community, which was founded by a preschool teacher 13 years ago because she did not feel welcome at the ISSTD conference.
I wonder why.
Because she was the patient, she was the consumer. And so Jamie Pollock is her name. She founded Healing Together because she wanted a place where professionals and people with dissociative issues can feel out and not judged. And so, yeah, because you were at this training last week where I got that question. I thought we're not supposed to indulge the dissociation. That was the word that was given. We're not supposed to call the parts by their name. We're supposed to like treat the person as an adult who just happens to have these folks on board. And I will say some clients, because this even came up in the book, that's their preference. Like, I use I pronouns, even though I have DID. I treat me like an adult, even though I have kind of kids on board. And there are other contributors who said, whichever part is out, please work with that part and don't try to make parts hide. And so, yeah, I just, the thing I really want to impart is the more I have embraced my willingness to talk like this, to be like, this is us, this is how our mind is structured, the better I have felt. The more progress I have made in life.
One thing that stuck out to me from the training is that people asked, there was this conversation about dissociation in the context of EMDR work. And you said that in order to do your own work, you have to be in a light state of dissociation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So something that I have heard come from EMDR trainers' mouths before is don't let them dissociate. And I'm curious, using chat, if any of you from a trainer or consultant have ever heard something like that before, or something similar, like don't let them dissociate. To which my response is, you're not that powerful. No therapist is that powerful. A mind that needs to protect itself or have a need met, we're going to dissociate in one form or another if we need to.
Yeah.
And there is this kind of undertone in the EMDR community over the years that dissociation is automatically a bad thing. And that's why I wrote a chapter in the book called Dissociation is Not a Dirty Word.
Right. And it's not just not a dirty word, but it's actually, for some people, it feels like a superpower. It makes you more creative. It makes you more, maybe you can talk, Jamie, about your own parts, about 4, 9, and 19, and what did they sometimes know that Dr. Jamie doesn't have that?
Yeah. Oh, I love talking about this. So 4 provides the childlike wonder. She fuels my smile and what a lot of people see as the more radiant side of me. That's a lot of what she gives me. And from a meditation perspective, because she is very childlike, she's the one who informs my beginner's mind, treating everything as if it's a new experience. She's the one, if I walk into a store and I see something like, ooh, lambs on a calendar, or doggies, puppies, like I have no problem doing that. I never have, but I now know that's a lot of her wonder that gives us that. So in a state when she's struggling, or in like deeper times in my life of unhealing, of course, she's the one who's most prone to abandonment. She's the one who's most prone to tears. She's the one who doesn't understand why people are so horrible in the world. And we often have to work with her about that. Yet, that is a lot of what gives us compassion for the state of where the world is at right now. So my 9-year-old part is what a lot of professionals would label, the acting out part, the one who is most associated with our suicidal tendencies, because at the chronological age of 9 is when we first contemplated suicide. At the chronological age of 9 is when we first started injuring ourselves. And so when we feel overwhelmed, trapped, she's very prone to I'm trapped as a negative cognition. There can be that tendency to feel our darkest. She kind of holds the dark nights of the soul that we've had in our life. But something I'd love to share about her is that she is awesomely cynical in a way that's helpful. She's the one who can call out the bullshit when we go to these academic conferences. Like, please. She's the one who can tell us, especially when we go into worker bee mode and Dr. Jamie comes out and, let's get shit done. She's like, Jamie, you're sounding like mom. Just lay down and take a nap. You need to rest. Remember, we went through a bad breakup once and she's like, would you just let yourself be sad? And yeah, I mean, she's awesome. She's absolutely awesome. And then 19, and all of these parts, and I believe, and I think, there's different theories on how parts form. Are they always there, and do they join with greater integration? I don't really get caught up in a lot of these debates. I know for me, my parts do represent horrible things I went through at those ages in my life. 19, I experienced a tremendously traumatic loss of my high school guidance counselor, who was a very dear mentor to me. She was probably my first surrogate parent who helped to meet a lot of the needs that I needed to have met. And she died very suddenly, very unexpectedly. And my more religious parent attacked me, saying that it was my fault she was dead because I had left the church. And yeah. So there was that on top of, when I was 19, I knew I came out to myself, because a lot of queer people, we have to come out to ourselves first before we could come out to anyone else. And I had that moment happen at 19. And there was just a lot of stuff that was bubbling over because I was finally not living in my parents' house. And I drank a lot. And for a lot of years, I denied 19's wisdom because she was the lush, she was the drunk. But now, like, if you like my TikTok videos that I make, that's 19. She's the one who really developed a love of film and wanting to go to film school. And she holds so much of my creativity. I mean, her and Four together do a lot. I mean, we all have our own creative threads, but that's very much 19. So that's the short tour through my car. That is my system.
And in the book, you interview 61 different individuals with the dissociative systems, and I found it really interesting.
They don't all have dissociative systems, all the people I interviewed, but many, if not most, do.
Many of them are in the mental health field. Many of them are.
37 of the 61.
Right. So I'm wondering, that people posted in the chat already specific questions about IFS and exiles and managers. And I'm wondering if you can talk about, techniques or specific strategies, because that's something that we talked about, that you talked about in the training, that I really appreciated. You brought one individual that we talked about before we started recording, that I really appreciate the way she talked about this very structured, very rigid way of what you should and shouldn't do. And that takes away from being able to really listen to your client and see what they need. People are so stuck with the approach that they took. Maybe they waited in a lottery for 5 years to get into the training.
Gee, I wonder what therapy you're talking about. So, I actually have the video pulled up, the video clip. I can show it, which I think I want to here in a minute or so. But
is that why maybe we don't need another certification? Is that what you?
No, this is Melissa's rant. Melissa's
absolutely.
One of the contributors.
I would love for you to show this. I didn't know if I have permission, so I didn't mention her name, but
they are as open as a book. So I will just set this up by saying, probably the two biggest questions I get are, can EMDR be done with DID? And my short answer is, of course, if the therapist providing the EMDR isn't afraid of dissociation. Because I'm not universally going to say, oh, of course you could do EMDR with DID. If the therapist doing it is terrified of dissociation, you either need to get more consultation or get more consultation. And I shared this in the earlier training I did today. I really think consultation is even more valuable than training. And here's why. Training, and it's not totally poo-pooing training, but training will teach you these models and this language. And like Melissa will even say in their rant, it's fine to have all of that. Like, you can have a system for working with parts that you've learned, but also know a client with a dissociative system may resent the fact that you're trying to put them in a box. And so same thing with EMDR. You could learn the protocols of EMDR, yet when you actually get into your office, of course, you're going to need to adapt and modify. And that's where consultation actually helps bring training to life.
Yeah, and one thing I appreciate you said over the training, that clients with dissociative system have a much better bullshit radar than most people.
Hell yes, we do. And here's a lot of how I describe my bullshit meter. Part of it is, yes, my 9-year-old part, who is a bit gangster and rather cynical, has a pretty strong bullshit meter. And my 4-year-old part, she's the one who tells us whether we're safe with the person or not. So Debbie Korn, for instance, who's a great friend of this community, I know, like, we have always felt incredibly safe with Debbie in these academic spaces. Kurt Rounzen's another one who's a contributor for the book. So when people ask me, the second biggest question I get is, what model do you use for working with parts? My short answer is all of them and none of them. Now, that might sound a little confusing, but there's something I take from every model. There's a couple threads I really like in IFS. I would say if any model really has defined the way I've worked, it's more old school Jungian archetypes. Shout out to Andy Dobo, who's another common friend of ours. Right. I think that's still a fine parts model. Several of the indigenous healers I spoke to for this book as contributors said, whatever the mythology of a person's place is. So for instance, in Ecuador, a shaman I spoke to, every village has a story that goes along with the folklore of that village. And there are characters in those stories that represent different aspects. And that's how you work with people. Ego state therapy offers a lot. I think knowing the Fraser's Table article is a good tool. Yet fundamentally, we're being called to work with the client who's in front of us. And that's where I'm going to let Melissa take over.
Yeah, let's watch this video.
You can adjust the sound on your end. A little bit.
So one is cut it out with the theories. Just stop. If some aspects of some theories are helpful in articulating and language understanding what you feel is going on, great, but cut it out. Just stop assigning us an allotted amount of EPs or ANPs. Stop telling me that I'm the firefighter or I'm the damn, what's that called, protector, or just stop. Just cut it out. Sit down, get comfortable, drink some water, breathe deep, and listen to what you're being told and proceed accordingly. And the second thing kind of dovetails off that. Is just take care of yourselves. I think some of the worst therapy I had was from well-meaning people who were survivors who couldn't deal with their own shit and projected massively on me and probably on their other clients. And that's not okay. Get therapy, talk about what's going on, get honest with yourself. If you can't do the work at certain points in life, then don't do it. but stop using other people and theories to make yourself feel better. No offense to anyone, all the love in the world, but cut the shit.
I love that so much.
Oh, I do too. And I want to acknowledge, I know that may be hard for some of you to hear if you feel you really need theory to help you get a grounding in this. Because I know for me, this is such natural work to do because I've lived with this my whole life. So I do understand and have empathy for how learning IFS or learning ego state therapy may give you a template that you feel is missing, but let it be a template. And like Melissa's saying, listen to what you're getting and proceed accordingly. Dr. Kurt Rounzen, who I also cite as a contributor in the book, he is one who I knew from the beginning, he knew his stuff. And he was one of the real early specialists in dissociation and EMDR. He was kind of the specialty trainer for the EMDR Institute. And it still really is a specialty area for him, but he's not been elevated as much as some of these other names. And I think that's a shame. So yeah, I interviewed Kurt. I really wanted to pick his brain for this book. And he said, I tell therapists all the time, if you want to become a better...
to learn EMDR therapist, find a client with DID and do some work with them.
And listen to them. Yeah. And listen to them.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that.
And I think that's a lot of what Melissa, who is a therapist with DID, is saying. And something I hope you caught in that video is, so Melissa was speaking, Melissa Parker, who's a contributor for the book, but myself and two other plural therapists were listening in. And did you notice our reactions?
Oh, yeah.
How we're like, yes, preach. And why that's significant is this. I already touched on this earlier, that a lot of us with dissociative systems have sat at conferences over the years, hearing like the weighty, heavy stuff, thinking like, wait, are we missing something? And then once a lot of us have started to get together now over the last 10 years or so, it's like, no, you feel that way too? Yes. And so Melissa said something just in a private conversation, but it showed up in another video with their permission, that we are now that more plural therapists are out, we are going to start holding our allies to a higher degree of accountability about how they speak about us, the tone they project when they're talking about us. And I just think that made me feel good to hear them put that out there. Mm-hmm.
So Jamie, I want to open the conversation for our community members to join and ask you questions directly or post them in the chat. But I want to ask you one more question before we open it, is what needs to happen in our society and in our field to break the stigma about dissociation? And that, except for reading Dissociation Made Simple, what needs to happen?
Love that question. Just trying to think which direction I want to go in first. So where that conversation usually goes is there has to be an overhaul in the way media portrays dissociation. And my first talk on the virtual book tour here was on media portrayal of dissociation. And as somebody who loves film and the arts, I'm very passionate about it. We have to get better portrayals out there. We have to hold Hollywood accountable for the way that they've exploited DID for entertainment value. And there's a recognition that a lot of the stigma, a lot of knowledge therapists are even operating on about dissociation and DID are from what they saw in Sybil. And part of it, I don't blame therapists for, because so many of us, it isn't even mentioned in graduate school. Or if it's mentioned in graduate school, I remember what I was told is, dissociation, DID is so rare, we're not even going to dwell on it. And in the whole course of human existence, there have only been 200 cases of DID. And I still laugh, where did they get that number? I don't know. And we know now definitively it's not rare. It shows up in 1 to 1.5% of the population globally. And that's the same level of prevalence that we see schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. And there's literature to support that. But so there's that. But I think the deeper place I want to go, especially with aromatherapists, and this was one of my rants I posted earlier this week, we don't have a prayer of smashing stigma about dissociation or mental health in larger society until we crush it in our field. Because it is so, forgive my language, fucking sad to me. Don't forgive my language. It's 9.
I don't need
she tells it like it is.
Yeah.
It's so sad to me that even what I'm doing is seen as such a great act of courage. I appreciate it when people pay me the compliment, but like Melissa says, like, cut the shit. Like, why aren't we? And I never want to force people out of the closet. I feel very strongly about that too. In your own time, you have to read the setting you're in. Yet so many folks I talk to in doing this work are just terrified about coming out to colleagues, terrified of not being seen as credible enough, terrified of being reported, terrified of being misjudged. And until our field can get over that, until our field can encourage us to do the same thing we're asking our clients to do, we don't have a chance of squashing stigma, which somebody pointed out to me this week. Let's call it what it is: discrimination, hatred. That stigma is a bit of a comfy euphemism, right?
Yeah, well, you know what? I'm going to ask people to turn their video on, but I want to ask you one more question. And that's another thing that you talked about in training. And that is, what about your professional board? What about your liability insurance?
Yeah.
What do you do with that and with the stigma? And I'm going to turn the videos on now, and people can join us and raise their hands while you're answering this question. Yeah.
So something I did as part of my book research is I did the thing that so many people expressed fear about. What if my licensing board finds out? So I asked to interview my licensing ethics investigator and deputy director in the state of Ohio. And I basically said, I have some questions for you that my students are asking of me. And I had a very lovely meeting with them to talk through all of this, as lovely as a meeting with a board can be. And I encourage folks who are afraid to check out what the rules and guidelines are in your state, because in the state of Ohio, yes, you are required to disclose diagnosis at the time that you're licensed, but if there's evidence of treatment, it's a non-issue. If there's evidence of treatment, it's a non-issue. And then even as you move on in your career, people cannot file a justifiable complaint against you simply for having a diagnosis. Once again, there has to be evidence of mistreatment to a patient, harm that's been done to a patient or client. Now, that's not to say that spares you from the potential trauma or stress of going through an investigation, because I asked the board, 5 years ago, my deepest fear was my ex-husband, coming to you and they're like, we know how to read out vengeful spouses. We know how to read out kind of ex-employees that have a vendetta, or employers, or all of this. They said to truly move on a complaint in the state of Ohio, there has to be evidence, like credible evidence of impairment or harm to a client. That just discriminating against you for a diagnosis is discrimination. And I also consulted with Disability Ohio about that. So if you're afraid of coming out and that's your barrier, know who the disability advocacy organization is in your state, and consider talking to your board and asking kind of what the parameters are here. Amy Wagner, who is a contributor, she's out in the book about this and out publicly about this now, how she had a horrible experience in graduate school, because she decided to go to graduate school as a second career clinician, and she decided to be credible and vulnerable and all of this, and her graduate program held it against her. They held her to a higher standard. They were constantly checking on her. And they even kind of flagged the board when she first got licensed, and she had to go before the board And she has shared with us publicly, the board even said, we're so sorry you had to go through this. This is nonsense. Good luck. Have a beautiful career.